The twin suns of Vorthok Prime burned orange in the alien sky as thousands of beings filled the great stone amphitheater. The air smelled of strange spices and fear. Voices in dozens of languages mixed together in a constant buzz of noise. This was auction day on Vorthok Prime, and beings from across the galaxy had come to buy and sell slaves. Ji-Hai stood in the holding pen with 30 other prisoners. Her wrists were bound with heavy metal chains that left red marks on her skin. Her once clean uniform was now torn and dirty. 3 weeks had passed since the Vorthok raiders attacked her colony ship. 3 weeks since she watched her friends die. 3 weeks since she let herself be captured. The other prisoners around her came from many different worlds. Some had blue skin and 4 arms. Others looked like giant insects with wings. A few seemed almost human but had pointed ears and silver eyes. All of them looked broken. Their shoulders sagged. Their eyes stared at the ground. They had given up hope, but Ji-Hai was different. Her back was straight. Her dark eyes watched everything around her. She studied the guards, the buyers, and the layout of the amphitheater. She memorized faces and counted weapons. To anyone watching, she might have looked like just another defeated prisoner. But inside, her mind was working. The amphitheater was huge. Stone seats rose up in circles around a central platform where the auctions took place. Thousands of Vorthok filled the seats. They were tall beings with gray skin and long arms. Their faces had no nose, just 2 slits for breathing. Their eyes were large and black. They wore colorful robes that showed their rank in Vorthok society. Near the front sat the wealthy nobles and military commanders. Their robes were made of expensive materials and decorated with gold. Behind them sat the merchants and traders. At the back were the common soldiers and workers. All of them had come to buy slaves for different reasons. Some wanted workers for their factories and mines. Others wanted servants for their homes. The military commanders looked for strong fighters they could force into their armies. The wealthy nobles collected rare beings like trophies to show their status. A loud horn sounded across the amphitheater. The crowd grew quiet. The auction was about to begin. Kralvex sat in the front row with his group of followers. He was one of the most powerful military commanders in the Vorthok Empire. His dark red robes showed his high rank. Gold decorations covered his chest. A curved sword hung at his side. Other Vorthok nobles treated him with respect and fear. Kralvex owned 3 planets and commanded a fleet of warships. His palace was filled with slaves from dozens of worlds. He collected them like other beings collected art. The rarer the species, the more he wanted to own them. Today, he was looking for something special, something that would impress the other nobles and show his power. His black eyes scanned holding pens, looking for the perfect addition to his collection. The first group of slaves was brought onto the platform. The auctioneer, a fat Vorthok with a loud voice, began describing them. He spoke about their strengths and abilities. He pointed out which ones were good for heavy work and which ones were intelligent enough for complex tasks. The bidding was fast and loud. Wealthy buyers raised their hands and shouted numbers. Within minutes, the first group was sold and led away in chains. New slaves took their place on the platform. Group after group was sold. Workers, fighters, servants, and specialists. Each group brought good prices. The auctioneer smiled as he counted the profits. The buyers were happy with their purchases. The slaves were dragged away to their new lives of servitude. Then it was time for the special items. The auctioneer called for attention. His voice became excited as he announced the rare and unusual slaves that would be sold next. First came a group of crystal beings from the Andromeda system. Their bodies were made of living glass that changed colors. They were beautiful and valuable. The bidding was intense. A wealthy collector finally bought them for an enormous price. Next were the telepathic creatures from Proxima Minor. They could read minds and share thoughts. Military commanders wanted them for intelligence work. The bidding lasted for many minutes before they were sold. Then the auctioneer gestured toward the holding pen where Ji-Hai waited. His voice boomed across the amphitheater. Now we have something very special. A new species that has just been discovered. They call themselves humans. They come from a small planet called Earth in the Outer Rim territories. The crowd murmured with interest. New species were always exciting. Nobody knew what to expect from them. These humans are strange creatures. The auctioneer continued. They have only 2 arms and 2 legs. Their skin changes color in the sun. They are not very strong compared to most species, but our scientists say they are intelligent and adaptable. Ji-Hai felt anger rise in her chest as she listened to the auctioneer describe her people like animals, but she kept her face calm. She could not let them see her true feelings. Not yet. The auctioneer pointed at her. This female is a perfect example of the species. Look at her strange appearance. See how she stands straight even in chains. Our experts believe humans might be useful as servants or light workers. Kralvex leaned forward in his seat. Something about the human female caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she looked directly at the crowd, instead of staring at the ground like the other slaves. Maybe it was the fire he could see in her dark eyes, or maybe it was just that she was something new and different. The bidding will start at 50 credits. the auctioneer announced. A few hands went up. The price slowly climbed. Most buyers were not very interested. Humans were unknown. They might be valuable or they might be worthless. It was a risk, but Kralvex found himself more and more interested. There was something about this human that made him want to own her. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the challenge of breaking someone who still showed defiance. When the bidding reached 200 credits, most buyers dropped out. Only 3 were still interested. The price climbed slowly. 250, 300, 350. At 400 credits, Kralvex raised his hand. His voice was strong and clear as he called out his bid. The other buyers looked at him with surprise. Why would such a powerful commander want a weak human slave? The bidding continued for a few more minutes. But nobody wanted to compete with Kralvex. He was too powerful and too dangerous. At 450 credits, the auctioneer declared him the winner. Sold to Commander Kralvex. The auctioneer announced. HFY felt the chains around her wrists as guards approached to lead her away. She looked once more at the Vorthok commander who had bought her. He was watching her with those large black eyes. She could see the cruel smile on his face. Kralvex thought he had bought a helpless primitive creature. He thought he had won an easy victory. He had no idea that he had just purchased his own destruction. As the guards led her away from the platform, HFY began to plan. She had work to do. 3 days passed since the auction. HFY found herself in a world unlike anything she had ever seen. Kralvex's estate stretched across many acres of land under the orange sky of Vorthok Prime. The main building was a massive palace made of black stone and silver metal. Tall towers reached toward the sky. Gardens filled with strange alien plants surrounded the palace walls. Inside the palace, everything spoke of wealth and power. The floors were made of polished stone that reflected the light. Tapestries from conquered worlds hung on the walls. Expensive furniture filled every room. Servants from many different species hurried through the corridors carrying out their duties. GIHL had been given new clothes to wear. The simple gray dress marked her as a house slave. Her chains had been removed, but electronic bands around her wrists would shock her if she tried to leave the palace grounds. The Vorthok believed these bands would keep her under control. She spent those 3 days learning about her new prison. She watched the guards and their routines. She counted the security cameras. She studied the layout of the palace. She memorized the faces of the other slaves and servants. Most importantly, she listened to conversations and began to understand the politics of Kralvex's household. Kralvex barely noticed her during those first days. She was just another possession in his collection. The other slaves warned her to keep her head down and do as she was told. They had seen what happened. 2 slaves who caused trouble, but HFY was not planning to be a quiet slave. On the 3rd evening, everything changed. Kralvex was hosting a gathering in his great hall. This was not just any gathering. It was a celebration of his upcoming promotion to Supreme Military Commander of the Outer Rim Territories. Every important Vorthok noble and military officer in the region had come to honor him. The great hall was enormous. A high ceiling held up by tall columns reached far above their heads. Long tables filled the space. Hundreds of guests sat eating and drinking. The air was filled with the sound of voices and laughter. Servers moved between the tables carrying food and drinks. At the head table sat Kralvex with his most important guests. Military commanders in their decorated uniforms sat beside wealthy nobles in expensive robes. They talked about battles and politics and business deals. They praised Kralvex and spoke of his great future in the Vorthok Empire. Sub-Commander Thexnell sat at Kralvex's right side. He was younger than most of the other officers but had earned his position through skill in battle. His green eyes were sharp and intelligent. Unlike many of the other guests, he did not simply agree with everything Kralvex said. As the evening continued, the conversation turned to the expansion of the Vorthok Empire. They talked about the new worlds they had conquered and the species they had enslaved, and someone mentioned the recent discovery of Earth and the humans who lived there. "I heard you bought one of those new human slaves at the auction," Thexnell said to Kralvex. "Tell us about these humans. Are they really as weak as the reports say?" Kralvex smiled and took a drink from his cup. "They are pathetic creatures, small and weak. They have no natural weapons or armor. They cannot even see properly in the dark. I cannot understand how they survived long enough to develop space travel." The other guests laughed at his words. They enjoyed hearing about weak species that the Vorthok Empire could easily defeat. "But are they intelligent?" asked another officer. "Some of the weakest species make the best servants if they can follow complex orders." "We shall see," Kralvex replied. "I have her working as a house slave. Perhaps she will be useful for simple tasks. But I doubt humans have much intelligence either." Thexnell was not satisfied with this answer. "If they developed space travel, they cannot be completely stupid. Have you tested her abilities?" Kralvex set down his cup and looked around the table. An idea formed in his mind, a way to entertain his guests and demonstrate his power at the same time. "You want to see the human?" he asked with a cruel smile. "Very well. I will show you how easily these creatures can be controlled. He turned to one of his servants. Bring the human slave here. Now, the servant bowed and hurried away. Within minutes, he returned with Jihai, walking behind him. She had been working in the kitchens when the order came. Her hands were still damp from washing dishes. The great hall grew quiet as she entered. Hundreds of eyes turned to look at her. She had never seen so many Vorthok in one place. Their black eyes stared at her with curiosity and contempt. Some pointed at her strange appearance. Others whispered to their neighbors about this new species. Jihai walked slowly toward the head table. Her back was straight and her head was up. She did not look afraid or ashamed. Her dark eyes met the gaze of every Vorthok who looked at her. This was not how a slave was supposed to behave. Here she is, Krelvix announced to his guests, a perfect example of the human species. Look at her pale skin and strange hair. See how small and weak she appears. He stood up from his chair and walked around Jihai like she was a piece of art he was displaying. The humans think they are intelligent, but they are nothing compared to the Vorthok. We conquered their colony ships easily. We will conquer their homeworld just as easily. The guests nodded and made sounds of agreement. They enjoyed seeing their host demonstrate his superiority over a conquered species. Kralvex stopped in front of Jihai and looked down at her. Kneel, he commanded. Show my guests how humans submit to their betters. Jihai did not move. She stood exactly where she was and looked directly into his black eyes. The silence in the great hall was complete. Every person in the room was watching to see what would happen next. I said kneel, Kralvex repeated. His voice was louder now and filled with anger. Still Jihai did not move. She continued to stare at him with those dark human eyes. There was no fear in her face. No submission. Only a quiet strength that seemed to say she would not bow to anyone. The other guests began to whisper among themselves. This was not normal behavior for a slave. Most conquered beings learned quickly to obey their masters. A few began to wonder if there was more to humans than they had been told. Vex now leaned forward in his chair. He was watching Jihai with new interest. He had fought many battles against many species. He knew the look of a warrior when he saw one. This human female had the eyes of someone who had seen combat. Kralvex felt his anger rising. How dare this primitive creature embarrass him in front of his guests? How dare she refuse to obey his orders? His face turned dark with rage. You will kneel or you will be punished, he threatened. Jihai finally spoke. Her voice was calm and clear. She spoke in perfect Vorthok language without any accent. I kneel only to those who have earned my respect. The great hall exploded with shocked voices. A slave had just spoken back to her master. In public, in front of hundreds of witnesses. This was unthinkable. But what shocked them even more was that she spoke their language perfectly. How had a primitive human learned Vorthok so quickly and so well? Kralvex's anger turned to rage. His hand moved without thinking. The slap echoed through the great hall like a gunshot. The force of the blow sent Jihai stumbling to the side. She fell to one knee, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. The guests cheered and applauded. This was what they expected to see. A master putting a disobedient slave in her place. Order had been restored. But as Jihai slowly rose to her feet, something in her eyes had changed. The fire that had been burning quietly now blazed openly. She wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand and looked at Kralvex again. This time, her gaze held a promise of consequences, a promise of justice, a promise that this humiliation would not go unanswered. Kralvex saw that look and felt something he had not felt in many years, a small cold fear in the pit of his stomach. For just a moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake. But the feeling passed quickly. She was just a human, a weak, primitive creature. What could she possibly do to him? He would find out soon enough. The slave quarters were dark and quiet when Jihai returned from the great hall. Her cheeks still burned from the slap, and dried blood remained at the corner of her mouth. The other slaves looked at her with a mixture of fear and pity. They had heard what happened. Word traveled fast in the palace. You should not have defied him, whispered an old Xanthari slave named Kexpa. His blue skin was marked with scars from years of service. Now he will watch you more closely. Make your life harder. Jihai touched her swollen cheek and smiled. He thinks he has one. That is exactly what I want him to think. The other slaves looked at her with confusion. How could being struck down in front of hundreds of witnesses be part of any plan? They thought the blow had damaged her mind. But Jihai knew something they did not. She was not just any human captured by accident. She was Lieutenant Commander Park Jihai of the Earth Defense Corps. She had spent 12 years in military service. She had fought in the Centauri conflicts against 3 different alien species. She was an expert in combat, strategy, and xenobiology. Her capture had not been random. When the Vorthok raiders attacked the colony ship, she could have escaped in one of the life pods. Instead, she chose to stay behind and let herself be taken prisoner. Earth Command needed intelligence about Vorthok military strength, technology, and territory. The only way to get that information was from the inside. For 3 weeks she had played the role of a broken prisoner. She let them think she was just another victim of their raids. She studied their language during the journey to Vorthok Prime. She observed their behavior and customs. She learned about their society and their weaknesses. Now the real work could begin. Jihai waited until the other slaves were asleep. Then she quietly made her way through the dark corridors of the slave quarters. She had memorized the layout during her first 3 days. She knew which rooms were occupied and which were empty. She knew where the guards patrolled and when. In a storage room on the lower level, she found what she was looking for. Taman was sitting in the corner, working on a small electronic device by the light of a tiny lamp. He was a thin young man with intelligent eyes and quick fingers. He had been captured 6 months earlier when the Vorthok raided a human research station. "You are the new human," he said, without looking up from his work. "I heard about what happened. Tonight, my name is Jihai, and you are Tae-Min. I was an engineer before they brought me here." He finally looked up at her. "You spoke Vorthok in the Great Hall. Perfectly." How? Jihai sat down across from him. "I learned quickly. What are you working on?" Taemin held up the device. It was made from parts taken from various machines around the palace. Communication device. Very short range. I have been trying to contact other humans in the compound. Other humans? How many? 12 that I know of. Maybe more. They have us spread out across different work areas. Kitchens, maintenance, gardens, factories. The Vorthok think if we cannot talk to each other, we cannot cause trouble. Jihai smiled. They are wrong. Can your device reach all of them? Not all at once, but I can send messages that they can pass along to others. We have developed a simple code based on sign language from Earth. Show me. For the next hour, Taemin taught Jihai the communication system the humans had created. It was clever and simple. Hand signals that looked like normal work movements but carried specific meanings. Ways to leave messages using the arrangement of tools or supplies. Even methods for encoding information in the way they performed their daily tasks. We have been sharing information about the palace, Taemin explained, security routines, guard schedules, weak points in their systems, but we have not known what to do with it. Now you do, Jihai said. I need to meet with all of them. Can you arrange that? It will take time and it will be dangerous. If we are caught, we will not be caught, but first I need to understand more about our captors. Over the following days, Jihai began her real mission. She had spent years studying alien species for the Earth Defense Corps. She knew that every species had physical and psychological weaknesses that could be exploited in combat. The Vorthok were tall and strong, but their joints were different. From human joints, they could not bend in certain directions. Their long arms gave them reach but made them vulnerable to close combat. Their large eyes were adapted for their planet's dim light, which meant bright flashes could blind them temporarily. More importantly, she studied their culture. The Vorthok valued strength and honor above all else. They had complex social hierarchies based on military rank and noble birth. They followed ancient laws and traditions that even corrupt leaders could not ignore completely. She learned about the trial of strength, an old Vorthok custom that allowed any being to challenge a superior to single combat. If they could prove that superior had acted dishonorably, the winner took the rank, property, and status of the loser. It was rarely used anymore, but it was still legal under Vorthok law. She also discovered that Kralvex was planning something big. In 5 days, he would host a grand feast to celebrate his promotion to Supreme Military Commander. Every important Vorthok in the region would attend, including Overlord Zethkar, the regional governor. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Through Taemin's communication network, Jihai began making contact with the other humans. There was Sujin, a former military medic who now worked in the palace medical bay. She had been treating sick slaves and had gained access to medical supplies and drugs. There was Dong Ho, a security expert who worked in the palace maintenance department. He had been mapping the electronic systems and had found ways to disable alarms and cameras. There was Min Su, a pilot who worked in the vehicle garage. He knew which ships were kept ready for flight and how to operate Vorthok transportation. One by one, Jihai made contact with all 12 humans in the compound. Each had skills that would be useful. Each had been gathering information. Each was ready to fight back against their captors. But they needed leadership. They needed a plan. They needed someone who understood both human capabilities and alien weaknesses. They needed Jihai. On the 4th night after the incident in the Great Hall, all 12 humans met in secret in an abandoned storage area deep in the palace basement. It was the first time they had all been together since their capture. I know what you are thinking, Jihai said as she looked at their faces. You think I am crazy. You think there is no way we can escape from here alive. Some of them nodded. Others looked uncertain. You are right, she continued. We cannot escape, not all of us, not safely. Their faces fell. If even this confident woman thought escape was impossible, what hope did they have? But we do not need to escape, Jihai said with a smile. We are going to do something much better. We are going to take over. She spread out a hand-drawn map of the palace on the floor. It showed every room, every corridor, every guard post. It was more detailed than any official blueprint. In 3 days, Kralvex will host the biggest celebration of his career. Every Vorthok leader in this part of the galaxy will be here. They will all be in one place at one time. She pointed to the Great Hall on the map. That is when we strike. Not to escape, but to turn their own laws and customs against them. We are going to show them what happens when you underestimate humanity. For the next 2 hours, Jihai explained her plan. It was bold, it was dangerous. It required perfect timing and incredible courage. But it would work. When the meeting ended, each human returned to their duties with new purpose. They were no longer just slaves trying to survive. They were soldiers preparing for battle. Had made the mistake of his life when he struck Jihai in front of his guests. He had shown dishonor. He had given her the legal grounds she needed to challenge him. Soon, he would learn that humanity's greatest weapon was not strength or technology. It was the ability to turn apparent weakness into devastating advantage. The countdown to his destruction had begun. The next 3 days passed like a carefully planned dance. To anyone watching, the palace seemed normal. Slaves went about their duties. Guards walked their routes. Preparations continued for the grand celebration. But beneath the surface, something was changing. Jihai moved through the palace like a ghost. She appeared to be doing her assigned work in the kitchens, but she was actually gathering final pieces of intelligence. She learned the names and ranks of every important guest who would attend the feast. She studied the seating arrangements and the ceremony schedule. Most importantly, she confirmed that Overlord Zethkar would be present. Zethkar was the regional governor and the highest-ranking Vorthok official in this part of the galaxy. He had the authority to enforce ancient laws that lower-ranking officials might try to ignore. His presence would make her plan possible. Tay-Min worked in the palace power systems during the day, but his real job was much more complex. He had spent months learning how the security grid operated. Every camera, every alarm, every electronic lock was connected to a central control system. He had found ways to access that system without triggering alerts. I can disable the security cameras in the Great Hall for exactly 10 minutes, he told Jihai during one of their secret meetings. After that, backup systems will activate and I will not be able to control them. 10 minutes will be enough, Jihai replied. What about the guard communications? I can block their radio signals for a short time. But if fighting starts, they will use runners to call for help. There will be no fighting. Not the kind they expect. Sujin had been busy in the medical bay. As the only qualified medic among the slaves, she was allowed access to drugs and medical supplies. But she was not just treating sick slaves, she was preparing for the possibility that people might be injured during the upcoming confrontation. I have sedatives that can put someone to sleep quickly, she reported. Also, stimulants that can help someone stay alert and focused. And pain blockers in case anyone gets hurt. Prepare doses for all of us, Jihai instructed. We need to be ready for anything. But Sujin's most important discovery was not medical. While treating slaves in the medical bay, she had overheard conversations between Vorthok doctors and officials. She learned something that would be crucial to Jihai's plan. Kralvex has been taking enhancement drugs, she whispered during their meeting, substances that make him stronger and faster in combat. But they also make him angry and impatient. His judgment becomes poor when the drugs are in his system. This was valuable information. If Kralvex was using combat enhancers, he would be more dangerous in a fight but also more likely to make mistakes. Jihai filed this knowledge away for later use. Dong Ho had been mapping every electronic system in the palace. Security cameras, door locks, communication networks, even the lighting systems. He had found weak points that could be exploited. The main power generator has a manual override, he explained. If we need to cut power to specific areas, I can do it, but it would have to be coordinated perfectly. What about escape routes? Asked Minsu. That is the problem, Dong Ho admitted. There are only 3 ways out of the Great Hall. The main entrance, the kitchen entrance, and the emergency exit that leads to the gardens. All of them can be sealed electronically. We will not need to escape. Jihai reminded them. Remember, we are not running away. We are taking control. Minsu had been studying the vehicles in the palace garage. Kralvex owned several types of aircraft and ground vehicles. Some were for transportation, others were military vehicles with weapons and armor. If we need to leave quickly, I can pilot any of their ships, Minsu said. But getting to the garage during a crisis would be difficult. Prepare one ship for immediate departure, Jihai ordered. Hide supplies and fuel aboard. But remember, we may not need to use it. The other humans had been gathering information from their positions throughout the palace. They learned about guard schedules, weapon storage, and communication procedures. They identified which Vorthok officials were corrupt and which ones still respected traditional honor codes. Most importantly, they confirmed the details about the ancient trial of strength law. It was old and rarely used, but it was still legally binding. Any being, Even a slave could challenge a superior to single combat if they could prove that superior had acted dishonorably. The trial had to be witnessed by at least one official of higher rank than the accused. The combat was to the death or until one combatant surrendered. The winner gained everything that belonged to the loser: property, rank, status, even command. Of military forces, it was a law designed to prevent corruption and abuse of power, though it was almost never invoked in modern times. On the morning of the feast, Jihai held a final meeting with her team. They gathered in the same storage room where it had all begun. "Today changes everything," she told them. "After tonight, we will either be free or we will be dead. There is no middle ground." She looked at each of their faces. They were afraid, but they were also determined. Months of slavery had not broken their spirits. If anything, it had made them stronger. Remember, the most important thing is timing. Everything must happen exactly when planned. Damon, you disable the security systems when I give the signal. Sujin, you stay near the medical bay in case anyone needs treatment. Dong-ho, be ready to cut power if necessary. Minsu, keep the escape ship ready, but do not move unless I order it. What about the rest of us? Asked Taiwan, a young woman who worked in the kitchens. You have the most dangerous job of all. You must act completely normal. Serve the guests, clean the tables, do whatever you are told, but watch everything. Listen to every conversation. If the plan fails, you will need to get word to Earth about what you learned here. She pulled out a small data chip that Taman had prepared. This contains everything we have discovered about Vorthok military capabilities, technology, and territory. It must reach Earth Command no matter what happens to us. The group spent the next hour reviewing every detail of the plan. They practiced hand signals and confirmed timing. They discussed what to do if things went wrong. They prepared for every possibility they could think of. As evening approached, the palace came alive with activity. Hundreds of guests began arriving for the celebration. Military commanders in their finest uniforms stepped out of transport vehicles. Noble families in expensive robes made grand entrances. The most powerful Vorthok in the region gathered to honor Kralvex and his promotion. In the Great Hall, tables were arranged in perfect order. The finest food and drink were prepared. Musicians tuned their instruments. Everything was ready for a night of celebration and ceremony. But in the shadows, 12 humans made their final preparations for war. Jihai stood in the slave quarters, looking at herself in a small mirror. She had cleaned her face and arranged her hair. She looked like nothing more than a simple house slave. But beneath that appearance was a trained warrior, with years of combat experience and a detailed plan for revenge. Tonight, Kralvex would learn what it meant to strike a human. Tonight, the Vorthok Empire would discover that humanity was not as weak as they believed. Tonight, everything would change. The storm was about to break. The Great Hall had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast brilliant light across the polished stone floor. Tapestries from 100 conquered worlds decorated the walls. Long tables groaned under the weight of exotic foods and rare wines. The air hummed with conversation in a dozen alien languages. 500 of the most powerful Vorthok in the galaxy had gathered to celebrate Kralvex's promotion. Military commanders sat beside wealthy merchants. Noble families displayed their finest robes and jewelry. At the head of it all sat Overlord Zethkar, the regional governor whose word was law in this part of space. Zeth-Kar was ancient even by Vorthok standards. His gray skin was marked with ritual scars that showed his many victories. His black robes were simple but made of the finest materials. When he spoke, every other Vorthok listened. When he made a decision, no one dared to argue. Kralvex sat at his right hand, wearing the new insignia of his rank. He had drunk much wine and was in excellent spirits. His promotion was finally official. His command would extend across dozens of star systems. His power was greater than he had ever dreamed possible. Tell us about your plans for the Outer Rim. Territories, Zethkar said during a quiet moment in the feast. First, we will complete the conquest of the human systems, Kralvex replied. They have several colonies that still resist our rule, but they are weak creatures. It should not take long. You are certain they pose no real threat? Completely certain, my lord. I have studied them closely. They have no natural weapons, no superior technology, no special abilities. They are defeated and easily controlled. Subcommander Thexnell, who was sitting nearby, remembered the human slave from a few nights earlier. What about the one you purchased at the auction? Has she proven useful? Kralvex laughed. She learned her place quickly enough after I disciplined her. She has been very obedient since then. Humans understand only strength. As if summoned by his words, Jihai appeared at the edge of the Great Hall. She carried a tray of glasses filled with wine for the guests. Her head was bowed and her movements were those of a humble servant. She appeared to be exactly what Kralvex said she was, a broken slave who had learned to obey. But Thexnell noticed something the others did not. Her eyes were not those of a broken creature. They moved constantly, observing everything around her. She counted guards and noted weapons. She studied the positions of important guests and memorized the layout of the room. Jihai served wine to several tables, moving slowly through the hall. No one paid attention to her. She was just another slave doing her job. But she was actually making final preparations for what was about to happen. At exactly midnight, as planned, she gave a small hand signal to Taman, who was serving food near the kitchen entrance. He nodded slightly and disappeared into the back corridors. 2 minutes later, the security cameras in the Great Hall went dark. The guards in the monitoring room saw only static on their screens. They assumed it was a technical problem and began trying to fix it. Jihai set down her tray and walked toward the center of the hall. Her movements were no longer those of a humble servant. Her back was straight and her head was high. She walked with the confidence of a soldier approaching battle. Conversations began to stop as people noticed her. This was not normal behavior. For a slave, she was supposed to stay near the walls and out of sight. What was she doing in the center of the room? Guards! Kralvex called out when he saw her. Remove this slave from the hall. She is disturbing our celebration. But Jihai spoke before the guards could reach her. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily across the large room. I invoke the ancient right of the trial of strength, she announced in perfect Vorthok. The hall fell completely silent. 500 powerful beings stopped talking at once. The only sound was the soft music that continued playing in the background. I formally challenged Commander Kralvex for the crime of striking an unarmed prisoner without just cause. Jihai continued. This action violates the code of honor that governs all Vorthok military conduct. Kralvex stared at her in shock. How did a primitive human slave know about ancient Vorthok laws? How did she speak their language so perfectly? How did she dare to challenge him in front of the most important people in the empire? You are a slave, he said, rising from his chair. You have no right to challenge anyone. According to the ancient laws, any sentient being may invoke the trial of strength if they can prove dishonor, Jihai replied. The law does not exclude slaves. It applies to all who serve the empire, willing or not. Overlord Zethkar leaned forward in his chair. He was intrigued by this development. It had been many years since anyone had invoked the trial of strength. He was curious to see how this would play out. Continue, he said to Jihai. State your case. Jihai turned to face the Overlord and bowed respectfully. 3 nights ago, Commander Kralvex struck me in anger when I refused to kneel before his guests. I was unarmed and restrained. I had committed no crime and posed no threat. Under the Code of Honor, a military commander may not use violence against a helpless prisoner except in defense of life or in the execution of lawful punishment. She gestured toward the assembled guests. There are hundreds of witnesses to this act. Many of them were present when it occurred. Murmurs spread through the hall. Many of the guests had indeed been present that night. They remembered the incident clearly. The human had refused to kneel, and Kralvex had struck her down in anger. This is ridiculous, Kralvex protested. She is a slave, a possession, have the right to discipline my property as I see fit. The Code of Honor recognizes no property in sentient beings, Jihai responded. It speaks only of those who serve and those who command, and it forbids commanders from abusing their authority through unprovoked violence. Zethkar nodded slowly. The human was correct. The ancient laws were clear on this point. They had been written in a time when the Vorthok still believed in honor and justice. Before the empire became corrupt, the challenge appears to be valid, he announced. Commander Kralvex, how do you respond? Kralvex felt trapped. If he refused the challenge, he would appear weak and cowardly in front of his peers. His promotion might even be reconsidered, but if he accepted, he would be fighting a combat trial against a slave in front of hundreds of witnesses. This is insane, he said. I am a military commander with 20 years of combat experience. She is a weak human female who weighs half what I do. It would not be a fair fight. The trial of strength does not require fairness, Jihai said calmly. It requires only that both participants enter the combat willingly and that the challenge be based on legitimate grievance. She turned to address the entire hall. I am willing to face Commander Kralvex in single combat. If I lose, I will die as a slave and my accusation will be forgotten. If I win, I will have proven that he acted dishonorably and justice will be served. The hall erupted in excited conversations. This was the most interesting thing to happen at a Vorthok celebration in decades. A slave challenging her master to trial by combat. It was unprecedented. Bexnell studied Jihai's face and posture. She did not look like someone facing certain death. She looked like someone who had planned every word and movement. He began to suspect that there was much more to this human than anyone realized. I accept, Kralvex finally declared. His pride and anger had overcome his judgment. He could not appear weak in front of so many important people. But when I kill her, no one will ever question my authority again. Zethkar stood up from his chair. The challenge has been made and accepted. By ancient law, the trial will commence. Immediately, clear the center of the hall. Guards and servants quickly moved tables and chairs to create a large open space in the center of the room. The guests arranged themselves in a circle around the combat area. Everyone wanted the best view of what was about to happen. Ji-hai stood in the center of the circle, calm and ready. Around her, 500 Vorthok voices buzzed with excitement and anticipation. They expected to see a quick and brutal execution. We're about to witness something very different. The trial was about to begin. The great hall transformed into an arena. Tables and chairs were pushed back against the walls. The finest nobles in the galaxy stood in a circle around the combat area, their eyes bright with anticipation. Servants held torches to provide extra light. The musicians had stopped playing. The only sound was the excited whispers of hundreds of voices. Kralvex stripped off his ceremonial robes and jewelry. Underneath, his body was impressive even by Vorthok standards. Years of combat and enhancement drugs had built muscle upon muscle. His gray skin showed dozens of scars from battles across the galaxy. His long arms ended in hands that had crushed the life from many enemies. He flexed his fingers and rolled his shoulders, preparing for combat. This would be quick and brutal. The human was less than half his size and had no visible weapons. He would break her neck with his bare hands and end this. Embarrassment once and for all. Ji-hai stood perfectly still in the center of the circle. She had removed her slave dress and now wore only simple undergarments that allowed free movement. Her human body looked pale and fragile compared to the gray giant preparing to attack her, but those who looked closely could see things the others missed. Her muscles were lean and well-defined. Her stance was that of a trained fighter. Her breathing was controlled and steady. Her eyes never left her opponent. Overlord Zethkar raised his hand for silence. The trial of strength will now commence. The combat continues until one participant surrenders, is unable to continue, or dies. No weapons are permitted. No assistance may be given to either combatant. Let honor decide the outcome. He lowered his hand. Begin. Kralvex charged immediately. His strategy was simple. Use his superior size and strength to end the fight quickly. He planned to grab the human and crush her before she could move, but Ji-hai was not where he expected her to be. She moved like water, flowing to the side just as his massive hands reached for her. His momentum carried him past her, and she struck, twice, at the back of his left knee. The blows landed exactly on the nerve cluster she had studied in her xenobiology training. Kralvex stumbled but did not fall. He spun around, surprised by her speed. The enhancement drugs in his system made him feel invincible, but they also made him overconfident. Stand still and die quickly, he growled, lunging at her again. Again. Ji-hai was not there. She ducked under his reaching arms and struck at his ribs. Her fist hit a pressure point that sent pain shooting through his entire torso. The crowd gasped as the mighty Kralvex actually staggered from a blow delivered by a human half his size. How is she doing that? Someone whispered. X-Nal watched with growing amazement. The human was not fighting like a desperate slave. She was fighting like a trained warrior who knew exactly what she was doing. Every movement was precise. Every strike targeted a specific weakness in Vorthok anatomy. Kralvex began to feel the first hints of concern. The human was faster than he expected and seemed to know exactly where to hit him. But he was still much stronger. One solid blow would end this. He feinted left and then swung his right arm in a sweeping motion designed to catch her no matter which way she moved. But Ji-hai dropped to the floor and swept his legs. As he fell forward, she rolled away and came up behind him. Before he could turn around, she locked her arm around his throat in a perfect chokehold. For a moment, the hall was silent as the impossible sight registered in hundreds of minds. A human slave was choking a Vorthok. Military Commander. Kralvex roared in rage and threw himself backward, slamming Ji-hai into the stone floor. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs and forced her to release the hold. He spun around and grabbed for her throat. This time he was fast enough. His massive hand closed around her neck and lifted her off the ground. The crowd cheered. As it seemed the fight was finally over. Did you think your primitive tricks would work against me? Kralvex snarled. I have killed creatures far more dangerous than you. Ji-hai could not breathe, but she did not panic. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone watching. She smiled, then she pressed both thumbs into specific points on Kralvex's wrist. The pressure points she targeted controlled the nerves that operated his hand. His fingers went numb instantly and his grip loosened. She dropped to the ground and immediately struck upward with the palm of her hand. The blow caught Kralvex under the chin and snapped his head back. He stumbled backward, shaking his head to clear his vision. Impossible, he gasped. His hand was still numb and tingling. How do you know our anatomy so well? I study my enemies. Ji-hai replied calmly. All of them. The crowd was beginning to murmur with uncertainty. This was not going as anyone expected. The human was not only surviving, she was actually winning exchanges against a trained Vorthok warrior. Kralvex felt desperation creeping into his mind. The enhancement drugs made him aggressive, but they also clouded his judgment. Instead of fighting smartly, he attacked with blind fury. He charged again, throwing wild punches that would have killed most opponents. But Jihai had fought berserkers before. She knew how to handle enemies who relied on rage instead of skill. She let him tire himself with his furious attacks, staying just out of reach. When he overextended himself with a particularly wild swing, she moved in close and struck 3 times in rapid succession. Each blow targeted a different nerve cluster. His left arm went numb. His right leg began to cramp. Pain shot through his spine. For the first time in the fight, Kralvex fell to one knee. The hall erupted in shocked voices. No one could believe what they were seeing. A human slave had brought down a Vorthok military commander. But Kralvex was not finished. Desperation gave him new strength. As Jihai moved in to finish the fight, he grabbed a ceremonial knife from a nearby table. The blade gleamed in the torchlight as he swung it at her head. The crowd gasped. Weapons were forbidden in the trial of strength. By using the knife, Kralvex had broken the sacred rules of combat. Jihai dodged the blade easily. More importantly, she had gotten what she needed, clear proof that her opponent had no honor. You see, she called out to the watching nobles, he breaks the ancient laws even now. First, he struck an unarmed prisoner in anger. Now he violates the rules of honorable combat. This is the creature you chose to lead your armies. Overlord Zethkar's voice boomed across the hall. Commander Kralvex has violated the terms of trial by combat. The human is declared the winner by forfeit, but Jihai was not finished. I claim the right to complete the trial, she announced. He dishonored himself by using a weapon. Now I will dishonor him by taking it away. Kralvex swung the knife again, but the enhancement drugs were wearing off and his movements were becoming clumsy. Jihai caught his wrist and applied pressure to the nerve bundle. His hand opened involuntarily and the knife clattered to the floor. Then she performed a move that brought gasps from the watching crowd. Using his own momentum against him, she flipped the massive Vorthok over her shoulder and slammed him face first into the stone floor. Kralvex tried to get up, but his body would not obey him. The precise strikes to his nervous system had left him unable to coordinate his movements. He could only lie there, helpless and humiliated. Jihai placed one foot on his back and looked out at the assembled nobles. Her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. I am Lieutenant Commander Park Jihai of the Earth Defense Corps. I allowed myself to be captured to gather intelligence about your empire, your military secrets, your technology, your weaknesses. Everything I learned will be transmitted to my superiors. She paused to let this information sink in. You thought humans were weak and primitive. You were wrong. We are neither weak nor primitive. We are patient. We are intelligent. And we remember our enemies. Kralvex lay motionless. Beneath her foot, unable to rise, the mighty commander who had boasted of his power was now a broken figure, sprawled on the floor in front of hundreds of witnesses. By ancient law, everything that belonged to him now belonged to her. His rank, his property, his authority. But Jihai had bigger plans than simply taking his place in their corrupt system. The reckoning was complete. Now came the revolution. The Great Hall remained frozen in shocked silence. 500 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at the impossible scene before them. A human slave stood victorious over a fallen Vorthok military commander. The natural order of their universe had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Overlord Zethkar was the first to speak. His ancient voice carried the weight of absolute authority. By the ancient laws of trial by combat, the human has won. All property, rank, and status belonging to Kralvex now belongs to her. He paused, studying Jihai with new interest. You are now a military commander in the Vorthok Empire. Jihai looked down at Kralvex, who was still unable to rise from the floor. Then she looked up at the assembled nobles and military officers. Her voice was calm but carried clearly through the silent hall. I reject this rank and all that comes with it. Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. No one had ever refused a position of power in the Vorthok Empire. It was unthinkable. Instead, Jihai continued, I invoke the right of Exodus as granted by your own ancient laws. I claim safe passage from Vorthok space for myself and all who choose to follow me. Zethkar nodded slowly. The right of Exodus was another old law, rarely used but still valid. What property do you claim for this Exodus? All slaves currently held on this estate. All beings held against their will in your territory. They are now under my protection. The crowd erupted in angry voices. She was claiming hundreds of valuable slaves as her property. The economic loss would be enormous, but Zethkar raised his hand for silence. The law is clear. What belonged to Kralvex now belongs to the victor. This includes all slaves in his possession. Jihai gestured toward the walls of the Great Hall, where Taman and the other humans had appeared as if from nowhere. They no longer looked like broken slaves. They stood straight and proud, ready to follow their leader to freedom. My people have been gathering intelligence about your empire for months, Jihai announced. We know the locations of your military bases. We know the specifications of your weapons and ships. We know your supply routes and communication codes. We know which of your leaders are corrupt and which ones still believe in honor. She looked directly at Zethkar. This information is already being transmitted to Earth. My government will decide how to use it. The Overlord studied her with calculating eyes. You planned this from the beginning. From the moment I allowed myself to be captured, yes. You see us as weak because we do not have your physical strength or natural weapons, but you failed to understand our greatest advantage, which is, we think, we plan, we adapt, we turn our enemies' strengths against them. She gestured toward Kralvex, who was finally managing to sit up but still looked dazed and confused. He thought striking me would break my spirit. Instead, it gave me the legal grounds I needed to challenge him. Jihai walked toward the head table where Zethkar sat. The nobles and military commanders moved aside to let her pass. They were no longer sure what to make of this strange human who had shattered everything they thought they knew. I have a message for your empire, she said, addressing the entire assembly. Earth knows about you now. We know your capabilities and your weaknesses. We know which worlds you have conquered and how you treat the beings you enslave. She paused. To let her words sink in, humanity has a long memory. We remember our friends, and we never forget our enemies. What happens next depends on the choices you make. Zethkar leaned forward in his chair. Are you threatening us? I am giving you information. Earth has already begun preparing for contact with your empire. How that contact proceeds will depend on whether you continue your policy of enslaving sentient beings or choose a different path. The Overlord was quiet for a long moment. He had lived for centuries and commanded vast fleets. He had conquered worlds and enslaved entire species. But he had never encountered anything like this human female who had turned their own laws against them. Your request for safe passage is granted, he finally said. You and your followers may leave Vorthok space without interference. Thank you. Jihai bowed respectfully. But first, I have one more announcement to make. She turned to face the crowd again. Her voice carried to every corner of the hall. I hereby free all slaves on this estate. You are no longer property. You are free beings with the right to choose your own destinies. The hall erupted in chaos. Voices shouted in anger and protest. Some of the military commanders reached for their weapons before remembering they were in the presence of their overlord. But among the slaves and servants around the edges of the hall, a different sound could be heard. It started as a whisper and grew into a roar. The sound of hope, returning to beings who had thought they would never be free again. Creatures from dozens of worlds began to step forward. They had served as slaves for years, some for decades. Now they had been given the chance to reclaim their lives. Not all of them chose to leave. Some were too afraid or too broken by their experiences. Others had been slaves for so long they no longer knew how to be free. But many did step forward, ready to follow Jihai to whatever came next. This is impossible, protested one of the military commanders. You cannot simply declare all slaves free. The economic disruption alone will be your problem to solve. Jihai replied calmly. Perhaps you should have considered that before building your economy on the suffering of others. Zethkar watched the proceedings with fascination. In one night, this human had accomplished something no rebellion or military force had ever managed. She had turned the Vorthok Empire's own laws and traditions against it. How many will you take with you? He asked. Jihai looked around the hall, counting the beings who had stepped forward to join her. Approximately 300 from this estate alone, but my offer extends to all slaves in your territory. Word will spread quickly. And where will you take them? To Earth, to freedom, to a place where they can rebuild their lives without fear. She walked back to where Kralvex sat on the floor, still struggling to regain control of his body. He looked up at her with hatred and humiliation burning in his black eyes. You have destroyed me, he whispered. No, Jihai replied. You destroyed yourself. I simply made sure everyone could see it. She turned to address the assembly one final time. We will leave your territory within 48 hours. We will take nothing that does not rightfully belong to us. But we will take with us detailed records of everything we have seen and learned here. Those who treated their slaves with kindness and respect have nothing to fear from Earth. Those who delighted in cruelty and suffering should consider their actions carefully. Humanity has a long reach and a longer memory. Overlord Zethkar stood up from his chair. Your message is received and understood. Safe passage is guaranteed for you and your followers. He paused, studying Jihai with something that might have been respect. You have given us much to consider. Then my mission here is complete. As Jihai led her followers out of the great hall, the assembled nobles and military commanders remained in stunned silence. In the space of an hour, everything they thought they knew about humans had been proven wrong. The weak primitives they had planned to conquer. Isley had revealed themselves to be intelligent, determined, and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Word of what happened that night would spread throughout the Vorthok Empire and beyond. The story of the human slave who had brought down a military commander and freed hundreds of prisoners would become legend. But more importantly, it would serve as a warning. Earth was no longer an unknown factor in galactic politics.